Welcome to Francis Reads the Bible. Today I'm moving on to Judges chapter 2. So, Judges chapter 2 is about what I talked about in the previous chapter. That's the Israelites leaving these people in their land was not going to bode well for them. So, the angel of the Lord went from Gilgal to Bochim and said to the Israelites, I took you out of Egypt and brought you to the land that I promised to your ancestors. I said, I will never break my covenant with you. You must not make any covenant with the people who live in this land. You must tear down their altars. But you have not done what I told you. You have done just the opposite. So I tell you now that I will not drive these people out as you advance. They will be your enemies, and you will be trapped by the worship of their gods. When the angel had said this, all the people of Israel began to cry. From the deal they struck with the Gibeonites, yes, the Gibeonites had deceived them, and they didn't consult God before striking a deal with the Gibeonites. But even after when they discovered that the Gibeonites had deceived them, and remembering that God had told them to kill everybody in that land to occupy it, maybe they should have gone back to God, instead of just assuming, okay, yeah, since made this vow in the name of God, then yeah, we have to keep it. Maybe they should have still consulted God about it. And the thing now is that having those Gibeonites as slaves, or and servants, now further embolden them to do same to other people in the land of Canaan. Because so many other Israelite tribes kept other tribes of Canaan as servants and slaves, you know. So, and that is why the place is called Bukim or Buchim. They offered sacrifices. There they offered sacrifices to the Lord. Then Joshua sent the people, death of Joshua, sent the people of Israel on their way, and each man went to take possession of his own share of the land of Canaan. So as long as Joshua lived, the people of Israel served the Lord, and even after his death, they continued to do so as long as the leaders were alive, who had seen for themselves all the great things that the Lord had done for Israel. The Lord's servant, Joshua son of Nun, died at the age of 110. So remember when Moses was alive, he created leaders. So also there were still leaders when Joshua was alive. So Joshua died and all those leaders died, and there was no one left to remind the Israelites to worship God. Which is weird because everything was written down in the book of the Lord, and also it was being passed down from generation to generation, like even the Levites, the Aaronite priests, they were to remind, and there were certain times when they were supposed to read what God had done for the people of Israel to remind them. But well, these ones didn't experience all that, anyways, as generations passed on. It's interesting to note. So Joshua died at the age of 110, and he was buried in his own part of the land at Simnath Serah in the hill country of Ephraim, north of Mount Gaash. That whole generation also died. And the next generation, I think the generation born in the land of Canaan, now that they settled in, forgot the Lord and what he had done for Israel. Then the people of Israel sinned against the Lord and began to serve the Baals. The Baals were the other gods that the Canaanites worshipped. And worshipping them seems more interesting. They have orgies, sexual orgies, parties. People sacrifice their children to Molech and some other gods. Some crazy things. So they stopped worshiping the Lord, the God of their ancestors, the God who had brought them out of Egypt, and they began to worship other gods, the gods of the peoples around them. That's the people they hadn't killed, the people they made servants and slaves, the Canaanites around them. They bowed down to these gods and made the Lord angry. I'm just wondering, is it that mm, their fathers never told them see what God had done? Well, in a way, it's just like in modern times. I'm from the Igbo tribe, and then you notice parents who speak very fluent Igbo who give birth to their kids in Lagos and other states. Like their kids can't speak Igbo and you speak fluently. So why can't your kids speak? It's because they do not teach or they did not teach their kids Igbo. So it's the same thing with the Israelites. Their parents, fathers, and mothers never told them about God. So they stopped worshiping the Lord and served the Baals and the Astartes. The Baals and the Astartes are the gods of the Canaanites, which they had left alive. That's it. Canaanites that they had turned into servants and slaves. That's the Gibeonites and the others. And I guess because it seems more fun, because those gods, their worship involves orgies, sexual orgies, lots of parties, drinking, so many whatever. And then some offer their gods their children, and whatnot. And so the Lord became furious with Israel and let traders attack and rob them. He let the Israel enemies all around overpower them, and Israelites could no longer protect themselves. Of course, they had enemies all around because you can't come into a country and kill a lot of people and you leave some alive to be your servants and slaves. Some of the people you didn't even know were alive would run into, the hills and the mountains and be planning attacks from there. Even people serving you as servants and slaves want to kill you, you know. So every time they would go into battle, the Lord was against them, just as He had said He would be. They were in such great distress. And the Lord gave the Israelites leaders who saved them from the raiders. And these leaders, who I believe are the judges. But the Israelites paid no attention to their leaders. Israel was unfaithful to the Lord and worshipped other gods. Their fathers had obeyed the Lord's commands, but this new generation soon stopped doing so. Whenever the Lord gave Israel a leader, the Lord would help that leader and would save the people from their enemies as long as that leader lived. The Lord would have mercy on them because they groaned under their suffering and oppression. But when the leader died, the people would return to the old ways and behave worse than the previous generation. They would serve and worship other gods and stubbornly continue their own evil ways. Then the Lord would become furious with Israel and say, this nation has broken the covenant that I commanded their ancestors to keep, and then he will punish them for not keeping the covenant. I think another thing of interest to note, which I have learned from this chapter of Judges, is that covenants are important. When there's a covenant and it is not kept, there will always be consequences of that covenant. Okay, we're African. Our ancestors, generations back, did not worship the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They worshipped other deities, other gods, spirits. And then you come in present times, these people that in a family, people will get to the age of 40 and they will die. Or there'll be madness running around in that family or something in that family. And then they'll go to church and then they will discover that, oh, your ancestor had a covenant with so deity generations ago, and because that deity is angry that you guys are not keeping the covenants and the rules of the covenants. Maybe they're supposed to sacrifice something yearly, do have a festival yearly or something, and it's not kept. So when it comes to covenants, there are always consequences. I will no longer drive out any of the nations that were still in the land when Joshua died. I will use them to find out whether or not these Israelites will follow my ways as their ancestors did. So the Lord allowed these nations to remain in the land. He did not give Joshua victory over them, nor did he drive them out soon after Joshua's death. So you see, covenants, if you're taking any covenant today, maybe to have wealth, to have children, either with God or with some spirits, not of God, is not just about you. That covenant will be in existence generations after you are gone, and your descendants will suffer the consequences of not keeping that covenant. So if you're making any covenants now, you install your children, oh, this is covenant I made with God, and this is what I promised God, or this covenant I made with this shrine or this altar or this demonic spirit, and for children or for wealth, and this is what was promised to that, spirit. And they have to keep telling their descendants, their own children's children, children's children, children, like that. So the consequences of not keeping the covenant would not come back on them, which is that's what I've learned from this chapter. The covenants last forever. They outlive the person who even did the covenants. And that's true. And there are always consequences and blessings for covenants. Depends on the spirit you made the covenant with and what the consequences are. As always, I'm not a pastor or anything. I'm just a Christian reading her Bible and hoping, it encourages you to read yours. So I pray God blesses us, keeps us, and may His light continue to shine upon us. Please read your Bible. This is Frances Reads the Bible. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.